The world had always been at peace. After centuries of wars and conflicts, humanity had finally found a way to live in harmony. Nations worked together, technology advanced, and Earth was on the brink of a new golden age. People were more concerned about their daily lives, their work, their families, than the mysteries of the stars. The night sky, once filled with stories of explorers and adventurers, had become just another part of the background, something people glanced at without thinking. But deep in the vastness of space, an ancient and powerful threat had been watching. Earth. The Korath Empire, an alien race that had swept through galaxies and destroyed countless civilizations, had set its sights on humanity. They had been observing Earth for years, studying its people, its weaknesses, and its strengths. They knew Earth's history of peace and unity would make it an easy target. They believed that humans, with their relatively short history and fragile technology, were nothing compared to the might of the Korath. The first signs of danger came, in the form of strange signals, beeps and static from deep space. At first, no one thought much of it. Scientists and military officials dismissed them as nothing more than background noise, perhaps from an unknown cosmic source. But when the signals grew stronger and more frequent, a few experts began to worry. They realized that these signals were not random. They were deliberate. It was only when a small, unidentified object appeared in Earth's orbit that the true threat became clear. The object was small, just a speck in the sky. It did not seem menacing at first, perhaps a satellite from a distant country or some piece of space debris, but it moved with a precision no human-made object ever could. It remained in orbit for several days, silently watching Earth. A few days later, it vanished. It was gone without a trace, but the world's leaders were beginning to take notice. The United Nations held an emergency meeting, and the military began to ramp up surveillance. They had no idea who or what was watching them, but they knew. It was time to be cautious, however, they were too late. One fateful morning, the silence was broken. Without warning, hundreds of ships, massive and sleek, appeared from the blackness of space. They were unlike anything humanity had ever seen. Their dark, jagged hulls shimmered in the sunlight as they descended into Earth's atmosphere, their speed and precision overwhelming. The world's militaries scrambled to react, but their attempts were futile. No weapon on Earth could stop the invaders. The ships unleashed their power in an instant, firing beams of energy that tore through cities like paper. Buildings collapsed, firestorms spread, and chaos erupted. In the span of just a few hours, the invaders had turned the Earth into a battlefield. The Korath Empire had arrived. The human response was slow and disorganized. Nations were in a state of shock, unprepared for such an overwhelming assault. In some countries, governments had fallen in a matter of minutes. Cities that had once been symbols of human achievement were now reduced to smoldering ruins. The people of Earth, once proud of their advancements and unity, were now at the mercy of an alien force they couldn't even comprehend. Humanity fought, back with everything it had. Military forces across the globe launched counterattacks, firing missiles and using advanced weaponry. But the Korath ships were simply too powerful. Their technology was centuries, if not millennia, ahead of Earth's. The human weapons couldn't even scratch the surface of their armor. Every attack was repelled effortlessly, every city targeted with precision. A sense of helplessness spread across the planet. Families hid in underground shelters, hoping for survival. In major cities, chaos erupted as people scrambled for safety. Leaders issued desperate orders, but it was clear humanity was outmatched. The Korath had no interest in negotiations or peace. They had come to conquer, and they would stop at nothing to see that their empire expanded. In the midst of this chaos, a small group of scientists and military officials realized something that sent a chill down their spines. Earth had been targeted, specifically. The Korath were not just randomly attacking planets. They had been monitoring Earth for a reason. They knew humanity's potential, and they feared it. They saw humanity's unity, its innovation, and the resilience of its people. Earth had always been a peaceful planet, but it was on the verge of something great, something that could threaten the stability of the Korath Empire. The Korath had come not to conquer Earth for resources, but to eliminate a potential threat before it had the chance to grow. As the cities burned and the world fell into darkness, a single transmission was sent out. In the final hours of Earth's defense, a desperate plea for help was broadcast into space. The message was short, urgent, and filled with the desperation of a planet on the edge of annihilation. We need help. We are humanity. We will not fall without a fight. Please answer our cry. It was a message to anyone who could hear it, anyone who could come to their aid. The military scrambled to send it far beyond Earth's atmosphere, hoping against hope that someone, somewhere, would answer. But as the Korath continued their relentless assault, it seemed as if all hope was lost. However, as the last of Earth's defenses crumbled, a single ship, unlike any that had been seen before, appeared at the edge of the solar system. The vessel was massive, its dark form cutting through the void like a shadow. It was not a Korath ship, but it was unmistakably human in design. It moved swiftly, effortlessly, and made its way toward Earth with a speed that took even the Korath by surprise. This ship was humanity's final hope. As the Korath ships continued to strike at Earth's cities, humanity's vengeance, its cry for help, had been heard, and the ship that answered would bring with it a new force, one capable of turning the tide in the war for Earth's survival. The hour was darkest, but humanity's answer to the Korath's invasion had only just begun. The world was falling apart. Cities that had once stood tall, symbols of human achievement and progress, were now nothing more than rubble and ashes. The invaders, the Korath, had swept across the planet with unimaginable speed and force. They had come from the dark depths of space, bringing destruction to every corner of the Earth. Nothing seemed to stand in their way. No military strategy, no defense system could slow their advance. Humanity's last hope lay in a small, scattered group of survivors who had managed to avoid the worst of the destruction. They were from all walks of life, soldiers, scientists, engineers, civilians, and now they found themselves united by a common cause: survival. As the Korath forces destroyed everything in their path, these survivors had only one mission: to make a final stand, to fight for their planet, and to buy as much time as possible for any last hope that might arrive. The global military forces, now in disarray, tried desperately to organize a coordinated response. The remaining world leaders, hidden in underground bunkers, held emergency meetings, but the task was impossible. The Korath were simply too powerful. In some regions, human forces had managed to put up a fight, but the Korath easily crushed their efforts. The human military's technology, though advanced, was nothing compared to the alien invaders' weaponry. Each time humanity launched a counterattack, it was met with the cold, efficient force of the Korath. As the days passed, hope began to fade. Many cities were lost, and the Korath began to focus on the remaining pockets of resistance. The human military, though brave, was slowly being pushed back, retreating into the last strongholds of the planet. There was no question that the Earth was on the brink of total collapse. The Korath would soon control everything. But the spirit of humanity, though battered and bruised, had not yet been broken. The United Nations, now the last governing body left, issued a final order. Hold your ground. Protect what remains of Earth. We cannot give up. These words, though filled with desperation, were the rallying cry for the last remaining human forces. The survivors, fighting for their homes, their families, and their way of life, prepared for one last push against the overwhelming force of the Korath. It was in the underground military command centers that the last plan for Earth's defense was formed. A team of military leaders, strategists, and scientists gathered in a small, secret location in the mountains. The survivors had gathered here to make their final stand, using all the technology they had left to defend the planet. But they knew the odds were slim. Still, they had to try. The world had given everything it had, and now they would make their final attempt to push back the invaders. General Noah Turner, the leader of the remaining human forces, stood before the group, a sense of grim determination in his eyes. We may be outnumbered and outgunned, but we are not without hope. We are humans, and we fight with everything we have. If we go down, We do so knowing that we gave it everything we could." His words were met with nods of agreement from the others who understood the dire circumstances. They knew this would be humanity's last stand. There was no more room for failure. The Korath would either wipe them out entirely or be driven back from Earth. It was all or nothing. Around the room, the team worked tirelessly. Engineers and tech experts worked to make the most of Earth's remaining resources, repurposing weapons, shields, and technologies that had once been considered obsolete. They knew that Earth's advanced technology couldn't match the Korath's, but they could still use their ingenuity to create a defense that could surprise the invaders. Every soldier who could fight was being armed and trained. There were no more questions about the cost. Everyone knew the risks. Meanwhile, the Korath pressed forward, showing no mercy. They had learned to fear humans, but they also believed that their overwhelming might would crush any remaining resistance. Their ships loomed overhead, dark and intimidating, as they continued their bombardment. The once beautiful cities of Earth, home to millions of people, were now smoking ruins. The Korath moved methodically, wiping out entire cities without hesitation, showing the same cold efficiency they had used to conquer countless worlds before. But humanity had something. The Korath didn't understand. They had resilience. They had never known how to quit. Even when it seemed like everything was lost, the will to fight burned bright within the survivors. As night fell over the Earth, the remaining human forces prepared for what would likely be their final battle. Soldiers armed with whatever they had left gathered at the front lines. They were joined by scientists and engineers who had turned their knowledge into makeshift weapons. Among them, civilians who had no military training but wanted to protect their homes stood alongside the trained soldiers. The spirit of unity and survival ran deep. The human forces launched their first offensive at dawn. It was a desperate move, a surprise strike against a Korath command center. General Turner led the charge, directing his forces with precision and urgency. The battle was fierce, and the Korath were caught off guard. For a moment it seemed as though the humans might have a chance. They fought with everything they had, refusing to back down, even as the Korath retaliated with devastating force. The Korath, although more powerful, were now facing something they hadn't counted on: the ferocity of humanity's will to survive. But even in the face of such bravery, the Korath began to regroup. Their ships descended upon the human forces, firing deadly energy blasts that decimated entire squads. It was clear that the Korath would not be so easily defeated. Still, the humans fought on, using every tactic, every weapon, every bit of ingenuity they could muster. General Turner, though, did not lose hope. He knew this was just the beginning. The Korath had underestimated humanity before, and they were about to learn that this time, things would be different. In the middle of the battle, the command center received the transmission they had been waiting for. The mysterious ship, humanity's last hope, had entered Earth's orbit. The battle was far from over, but the arrival of the ship brought with it a spark of hope. Humanity's vengeance was just beginning. The Korath would soon realize that they had awoken something far more dangerous than they had anticipated. The battle raged on, and the human forces, though outmatched and overwhelmed, continued to fight. They held their ground with every ounce of strength they had left, but it was clear that Earth's survival hung by a thread. The Korath were everywhere, their ships hovering in the sky like dark clouds, raining destruction down on the few remaining human strongholds. The destruction seemed endless. Cities were leveled, and even the most well-defended military bases were falling. Yet, amid the chaos, there was something stirring in the hearts of the soldiers and civilians who still fought. Despite the odds, despite the overwhelming power of the Korath, there was a fire that refused to go out. Humanity had been pushed to the brink of extinction, but it was not broken. The world, broken and battered, stood together in defiance. Even as cities burned, people who had never held a weapon were standing side by side with soldiers, using whatever they could to fight. General Noah Turner, leader of the last human forces, stood in the command center, his mind racing. The Korath had underestimated humanity's will to survive, but they were powerful. Every attack they launched was met with ferocity, but it wasn't enough. The human forces were losing ground. The survivors were barely holding on. "We can't keep this up," General Turner said to his second-in-command, Lieutenant Emily Scott, as they looked over the maps of the battlefront. The enemy was advancing faster than anticipated. "We need something more. We need to win or Earth is lost." Scott nodded, her expression grim. "We've sent out the message. There's nothing else we can do but wait." The desperation in her voice echoed Turner's thoughts. They had sent a final, urgent transmission into space, a cry for help to anyone who could hear it. It had been a long shot, but they had no other choice. If help did not come soon, Earth would fall, the Korath would win, and humanity's fight for survival would be in vain. But as the final hour approached, something unexpected happened. In the midst of the ongoing battle, a strange anomaly appeared on the horizon. It wasn't a Korath ship. It wasn't anything that had been seen before. It was a massive vessel, its design sleek and unfamiliar, cutting through the sky at a speed that was unlike anything humanity had ever encountered. The human forces watching from the ground thought it was another Korath attack, but this ship wasn't firing on them. It was heading straight for the Korath fleet. General Turner's eyes widened in disbelief. He grabbed the radio, his voice a mixture of surprise and hope. "This is General Turner to all forces. You see that ship? It's not Korath. I repeat, it's not Korath. Prepare to adjust tactics. We may have just found our salvation." The enormous vessel descended toward Earth, and in a matter of minutes, it was in position above the Korath forces. At first, the Korath didn't react. They seemed to be unsure of what to make of the new ship. But when it opened fire, all hesitation disappeared. The ship unleashed a barrage of energy blasts that struck the Korath ships with deadly force. The enemy, stunned by the sudden assault, began to retreat, but it was too late. The human-designed ship, appearing out of nowhere, had proven more than capable of holding its own against the Korath. Human forces, seeing the Korath retreating, rallied. With the new ship on their side, the human forces found new strength. They pushed forward, fighting with renewed energy. The Korath, unable to comprehend what was happening, were thrown into disarray. The mighty invaders had underestimated humanity once again. The mysterious ship fired again, hitting Korath ships and causing massive explosions. Humanity's forces followed in the wake of the new ship, launching their own attacks. It was as if a veil had been lifted, and the Korath suddenly saw that the humans were no longer helpless. They were no longer weak. Humanity had found its strength. General Turner couldn't believe his eyes. The unexpected arrival of the ship had turned the tide. This was the moment they had all been waiting for, the moment when humanity's cry for help had been answered. But as the battle raged on, Turner realized that this was just the beginning. The Korath were still a threat. Their fleet was vast, and their ships were powerful. This single ship might have turned the tide, but they needed more than just one ship if they were going to win this war. The mysterious vessel was not just a powerful weapon. It was a symbol of humanity's resilience. It was a reminder that no matter how dark things became, humans could rise to meet any challenge. No matter how impossible the odds, they would never give up. As the battle continued, Turner saw the ship's design clearly for the first time. It was sleek and futuristic, yet unmistakably human in its design. The ship seemed to almost hum with life, as though it were alive itself. It was like nothing Turner had ever seen, and he could only guess at the technology that powered it. One thing was certain: it was humanity's last hope. On the ground, the human soldiers fought with everything they had. They knew that this was their one chance. The Korath might have thought they had won, but humanity was proving them wrong. The fight was far from over. But for the first time in days, Turner saw a glimmer of hope. The Korath would not take Earth without a fight. And humanity's vengeance, fueled by the survivors' will to protect their home, would be felt across the stars. The new ship continued its assault, taking down Korath ship after Korath ship. Human forces moved in, coordinating their efforts with the mysterious ship in the sky. Together they launched attack after attack, slowly but surely driving the Korath back. The tides of war had shifted. The Korath could no longer move with impunity. Now, humanity was striking back with everything they had. But even as they pushed forward, General Turner knew the real fight was just beginning. The Korath had underestimated them once. They would not make the same mistake again. The true test of humanity's strength was yet to come, and it would take everything they had to win. For now, though, humanity had proven one thing beyond doubt. They would not go quietly into the night. Their cry for help had been answered, and with it, the fires of vengeance were lit. The Korath would soon learn that humanity was not to be trifled with. The battle between humanity and the Korath had turned into a war of attrition. Earth's defenders had fought with everything they had, using their last remaining resources to hold back the invaders. It was a desperate fight, but the appearance of the mysterious human warship had given the surviving forces hope. Humanity, once on the verge of collapse, was now on the offensive. The Korath, who had once thought Earth would fall quickly, were now forced to reckon with the unexpected resilience of humanity. The Korath, despite their superior technology, had underestimated the strength of human will. Every time they thought they had defeated the humans, the survivors would rise again more determined than ever. The new ship that had arrived was the key. It had tipped the scales in humanity's favor, but the battle was far from over. Humanity had only one chance left to reclaim their world. General Noah Turner stood on the command deck of the warship, watching the destruction unfold below him. The Korath forces were retreating, but they weren't giving up without a fight. The human warship fired relentlessly, its energy blasts tearing through the skies and hitting Korath ships with deadly precision. For the first time, the humans felt like they had the upper hand. The Korath ships were being pushed back, but the alien fleet was vast, and there were still many ships left. "We're not finished yet," Turner said, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. "Keep up the pressure. We need to take down their flagship before they regroup." Lieutenant Emily Scott, his second-in-command, nodded from the operations table. "General, we've got their fleet on the run, but their flagship is still holding strong. It's going to take everything we have to bring it down." The human warship, still striking from above, sent another barrage of energy blasts toward the Korath flagship. The alien ship was large, far more formidable than the others, and its shields were designed to withstand even the most advanced weaponry. But the humans had no intention of backing down. They had one chance, and they had to make it count. "Prepare the assault team," Turner ordered. "We're going in." Human soldiers, their morale bolstered by the sudden turn of events, suited up and made their way to the drop zones. With the flagship in their sights, the human forces were determined to end the fight once and for all. The mission was risky. They would need to infiltrate the Korath flagship, bypass its defenses, and disable its core. The enemy would not make it easy, but they had come too far to stop now. The soldiers boarded their small assault craft and launched toward the flagship, their hearts pounding with the weight of the task ahead. The air was thick with tension as they approached the enormous Korath ship. The flagship towered over them, its surface covered in a metallic sheen that reflected the light from the nearby battles. But the human forces were undeterred. They had come this far, and they would not let the Korath stop them now. Inside the warship, General Turner monitored the operation from the command center. The battlefield had become a chaotic dance of destruction, with both sides throwing everything they had at each other. The Korath flagship had already suffered damage from the bombardment, but it was still operational. Turner knew that taking it down would be the turning point in the war. If they could destroy the flagship, they would cripple the Korath fleet and force them to retreat. The assault team made its way through the massive corridors of the Korath flagship, facing heavy resistance. The Korath soldiers were relentless, their alien weapons flashing as they fired on the human forces. But the humans were prepared. They fought back with precision and resolve, using tactics and teamwork that the Korath had not expected. Every corner they turned, every hallway they entered was a battle for survival, but the human forces pressed on, determined to succeed. Meanwhile, back at the human warship, the battle was far from over. Korath ships continued to fall, but the invaders were regrouping, their commanders issuing orders for a counterattack. The human forces knew that they had to act fast. The Korath were not going to let Earth go without a fight. Lieutenant Scott's voice came through the comms, urgent, but calm. General, we've breached the flagship. The assault team is making their way to the core. We need to keep the Korath distracted while they complete their mission. Turner's mind raced. This was it, the moment of truth. The Korath had underestimated humanity, but they were about to find out just how dangerous humans could be when cornered. Understood. We'll hold them off. Give our people time to finish the job. The human warship fired relentlessly, using every weapon in its arsenal to keep the Korath forces at bay. The enemy fleet, despite their superior numbers, was struggling to keep up with the pace of the battle. The human forces were relentless, refusing to allow the Korath a moment of peace. Every time the Korath tried to regroup, humanity was there, pushing them back. The assault team inside the Korath flagship continued to make their way deeper into the ship. They had come prepared, knowing that the Korath would not make it easy. But the human soldiers fought with a fury that the invaders had not anticipated. Every room they cleared, every hallway they crossed brought them closer to the ship's core. The Korath, realizing that their ship was in danger, redoubled their efforts to stop the humans, but it was too late. The human assault team reached the Korath flagship's core and planted the charges that would bring the ship down. The explosion that followed was deafening, sending shockwaves through the Korath fleet. The flagship, once the pride of the Korath Empire, was now a smoking wreck. The Korath fleet, without their command ship, was in disarray. The human forces seized the opportunity, attacking with renewed vigor. As the Korath ships began to retreat, General Turner allowed himself a brief moment of relief. The battle was far from over, but they had struck a blow that the Korath would not recover from. They had fought back, and they had won. For the first time in days, the tide had truly turned. Humanity's vengeance had been unleashed. The Korath had underestimated the strength of the human spirit, and now they would pay the price. The battle for Earth was not over, but humanity had proven one thing: they would never give up. The battle had reached its climax. The Korath Empire, once confident in their ability to conquer Earth, was now on the defensive. Humanity had done what was once thought impossible. The flagship of the Korath fleet had been destroyed, and their ships were retreating, forced to regroup after the catastrophic loss of their command center. It was a victory, but it was not enough. The Korath forces were still vast, their presence still heavy in the sky above Earth. Humanity could not afford to stop now. General Noah Turner stood on the command deck of the human warship, his eyes focused on the battle unfolding below. The human fleet had suffered losses, but the enemy had taken far worse damage. The Korath were not giving up, but the tables had turned. For the first time in days, there was a sense of hope in the air. It was a fragile hope, but it was enough to fuel the next phase of the fight. "Lieutenant Scott, prepare the fleet," Turner said, his voice steady. "We've taken down their flagship, but we need to finish what we started. We're going after their remaining ships. They can't be allowed to escape." Scott nodded from the operations table, her face tense but determined. "Aye, General. All ships are ready. We've got one shot at this." Turner looked out of the viewport, watching as the remnants of the Korath fleet regrouped. They were forming up, preparing for another wave of attacks. The Korath were regrouping, but they were vulnerable. The loss of their flagship had shaken them, and they had underestimated humanity. Now was their chance to strike the final blow. Human ships, once outclassed by the Korath's superior technology, now flew with purpose and precision. They were no longer just surviving. They were fighting to win. The human fleet moved into position, every ship aligned in perfect formation. The human forces had learned from their past mistakes. They had adapted, using every tactic, every piece of technology, every bit of ingenuity they could muster. This was their final push. "We've got them," Turner said quietly, as he observed the fleet from the command deck. "They've nowhere to run." The final confrontation was about to begin. With the Korath forces regaining some semblance of order, they now sought to take back control. The remaining Korath ships began to advance, their weapons powered up and ready to retaliate. They thought they had the upper hand, but they had no idea what awaited them. "Launch all fighters," Turner ordered. "No one gets through. Hold, nothing back." The human fleet surged forward, weapons blazing, striking at the Korath ships with all the might they could muster. The sky was filled with the sounds of battle, explosions, laser fire, and the whine of fighter jets slicing through the air. The Korath retaliated in kind, sending wave after wave of their own fighters, but they were outmatched. Humanity's fighters, with their new tactics and improved weapons, struck swiftly and precisely, tearing through Korath formations. The battle was intense. Every ship, every fighter, every soldier was fully engaged in the fight. There was no room for hesitation. Each side knew that the war would be decided in this final confrontation. The humans fought with everything they had, and it was clear that they would not back down. Every victory, every moment of success was a testament to the resilience and unity of the human spirit. On the ground, the survivors who had been waiting for this moment watched in awe. They had heard the reports of the fighting, and they knew that the end was near. It was impossible to predict what would happen, but they could feel the change in the air. Humanity was fighting back. The Korath were no longer unstoppable. The humans had become the storm that would break their invaders. As the human warships closed in on the remaining Korath fleet, General Turner's voice came through the comms. "This is it. We have to end this now. Target their remaining command ships. We can't afford to give them another chance." The remaining Korath ships, despite their superior technology, were no match for the sheer determination of the humans. The human warships, guided by their newfound strategies, worked together, each move calculated with precision. One by one, the Korath ships fell. Explosions rocked the sky as the human fleet cut through their defenses like a knife through butter. The human soldiers on the ground who had fought so hard to protect their homes, watched as the Korath fleet began to crumble. It was hard to believe, after everything they had been through, that victory was within reach, but they knew they couldn't let up now. The Korath had to be wiped out completely. This was the final stand. Inside the human warship, Turner's hands gripped the edge of the command table. His heart raced. It was a feeling he hadn't had in days. Hope. The Korath had pushed humanity to the edge of extinction, but now they were the ones on the run. And humanity was showing no mercy. The battle continued to rage, but the Korath were losing ground fast. They tried to regroup, to launch one final push to crush the human forces, but it was too late. The human fleet was overwhelming them. The tide of the battle had irrevocably shifted, and the Korath forces were no longer in control. As the last of the Korath ships exploded in a fiery blaze, General Turner's voice echoed through the comms. "The Korath are finished. Earth is ours." A cheer erupted throughout the fleet. The human forces, battered but unbroken, had won. The Korath Empire, once so confident in their ability to conquer Earth, had been defeated. The human forces had stood firm and pushed back an empire that had believed it could never be defeated. The battle was over. Earth had been saved. The cost had been high, but humanity had triumphed. The Korath had learned the hard way that humans were not to be underestimated. When pushed to the edge, when faced with annihilation, humanity would always find a way to survive. And in the end, humanity's vengeance had been sweet. The invaders had been defeated, and Earth's future was once again in human hands. The aftermath of the battle left Earth in a stunned silence. The once thriving cities, now scorched and reduced to rubble, seemed like a distant memory. The Korath had come with overwhelming force, leaving destruction in their wake. Yet, against all odds, humanity had prevailed. The Korath Empire had been shattered. Their invasion stopped in its tracks, and Earth stood tall once again, though at a great cost. General Noah Turner stood on the bridge of the human warship, looking out at the quiet expanse of space. The sky was no longer filled with the fiery explosions of battle, but the scars of war were visible. Earth had been saved, but it had been a hard-won victory. The war had taken lives, torn cities apart, and forever changed the landscape of the planet. But through it all, humanity had shown its true strength. Turner's mind wandered back to the days when he first received the call for help. At that time, Earth had been on the brink of destruction. The Korath had been unstoppable, their power unmatched. Yet humanity had come together, soldiers, civilians, scientists, engineers, all united in the fight for survival. The arrival of the mysterious human warship had shifted the tide, and now the battle was over. The Korath had retreated, and their once great fleet had been reduced to smoldering wreckage. "It's over, General," Lieutenant Emily Scott said, standing beside Turner. "We've won. Earth is ours." Turner nodded, though his face was filled with a quiet, thoughtful expression. "Yes, but the cost was high. Too many lives were lost. Too much was destroyed. We may have won this battle, but the real work begins now." Scott sighed, understanding the weight of his words. "We've got a long road ahead. Rebuilding, recovering, but we're alive. And that's something." The words hung in the air, as if echoing through the stillness of space. Humanity was alive. Earth had not fallen to the Korath. It was a victory, but one that would forever be marked by sacrifice. As the human fleet made its way back to Earth, the survivors on the ground began to emerge from their shelters. The war was over, but the world they returned to was far different from the one they had left behind. The cities had fallen, many of them reduced to dust, and the people who had survived were left to pick up the pieces. But there was a quiet determination in the air. Humanity had faced the darkness and had not only survived but had triumphed. Now they would rebuild. In the weeks that followed, nations came together to form a new global alliance. The old world, with its fractured governments and divisions, had been erased in the fires of war. What emerged from the ashes was something stronger, something united. People who had once fought against each other now found themselves working side by side, not only to rebuild the planet, but to ensure that something like the Korath invasion would never happen again. General Turner and Lieutenant Scott were among those who worked tirelessly to coordinate efforts. They knew that humanity's victory was not just a matter of military strength. It was the result of unity, of people coming together in the face of unimaginable odds. But they also knew that Earth's future was uncertain. The Korath had been defeated, but who knew what other threats might lie beyond the stars? "We need to prepare," Turner said one evening, looking out over the remnants of the destroyed cityscape. "The Korath are only one empire in this galaxy. There are others, out there. We need to be ready for whatever comes next." Scott joined him, her expression resolute. "We've already shown what we're capable of. We'll be ready." In the years to come, humanity's efforts to rebuild continued. It was not an easy process. The damage was vast, and resources were limited. But the spirit of survival, of perseverance, drove every action. Humanity had faced the unthinkable and had come out stronger on the other side. The Earth, though scarred, began to heal. New technologies were developed, new cities rose from the ashes, and the world began to feel alive again. But there was a deeper change within humanity. The events of the war had reshaped the collective consciousness. People no longer took their peace for granted. They understood now that peace could be fleeting, that survival depended not only on strength but on unity. Across the globe, new governments were formed, ones that placed the survival of humanity above all else. They focused on shared resources, collective progress, and preparing for the future, knowing that the universe was full of dangers. Earth's defenses were strengthened, and a new space program was developed to ensure that humanity would never again be caught off guard. General Turner, though no longer leading the fight, became a symbol of humanity's strength. He spent his days speaking with the leaders of the new world, helping to guide the rebuilding process and ensure that the mistakes of the past were not repeated. Lieutenant Scott, too, took on a leadership role, working alongside scientists and engineers to develop new technologies to better protect the planet and explore the stars. The two of them, once soldiers on the front lines, now worked as ambassadors of hope and unity. As Earth began to recover, humanity's reach extended beyond the planet. The space program, now led by Earth's new united government, focused not only on defense but on exploration. The remnants of the Korath fleet had been studied, and their technology provided valuable insights. Humanity was now armed with the knowledge that they were not alone in the universe, and they were determined to make their presence known. Humanity's future is ours to shape, General Turner said during one of his speeches, a vision of hope for the future. We are not just survivors. We are explorers, dreamers, builders, and together we will rise to whatever challenge the universe may throw our way. The message was clear. Earth had been saved, but the battle was not over. There was still a vast unknown universe to explore, and humanity had proven that it was capable of far more than anyone had ever imagined. The Korath may have come to conquer Earth, but they had only succeeded in awakening a force that would never again be easily defeated. The new dawn of humanity had arrived, and with it came the promise of a bright, united future, a future where the human spirit, tested and forged in the fires of war, would lead them to the stars.